Okay, we're going to start. We are in honor of Tu B'Shvat. Going to talk about a number of shilas, all interconnected, have to do with bugs in fruit. Okay. Sure for now. We don't care. Okay. The most people are surprised to hear that not all bugs are asur to eat. Okay? Most people don't realize it. But in fact, the Torah tells us that bugs only asur to eat. For land bugs, it has to be a sheretz al aretz. It has to have crawled. Okay, so a bug, just because it's alive doesn't mean that it's asur, or even if it's dead, should I say that. The fact that it was once alive doesn't mean anything. It has to have crawled. And the Gemara gives different rules of what that means to make the bug asur. So, for example, the Gemara says, if a bug was on the ground, or on a tree, that bug is for sure asur, even if it never crawled. If a bug is born on the ground, born on a tree, that bug is asur, even if it never moved. What we're talking about is a bug that was born off the ground. That bug that was born off the ground is not asur unless it crawled on the ground. Okay? And an example that came up recently, it's not really a new example. We're talking about fruit, we're not talking about fish, but it's very similar to the fish, very similar to that, is that it came up again now, but it's really an old child, which is when the people took up bugs in raisins. Okay, so bugs and raisins are, and we're going to talk about half of the Shivas Aminim tonight. Bugs and raisins don't form when they're grapes. Okay, grapes, and that's something unusual about fruits is that, as a rule, fruits are solid. Fruits also grow high off the ground, so there aren't that many. They're pretty uncommon to have bugs inside of a fruit. Okay, if you think about a grape, where would the bug go in the grape? If you have a lettuce, well, lettuce grows in the ground. Lettuce is wide open, and it's lots of curly places, lots of cracks and crevices for bugs to hide. If there isn't any place to hide in a grape. There are people who actually think there are bugs in grapes also, but by and large, we assume that there are no bugs in grapes and in apples. There's no place for the bug to go in an apple. Where's it going to go? So in fruits, there typically aren't bugs. Bugs tend to be in vegetables that have places to hide and are open. So there are no bugs in the bug that comes in a raisin doesn't come when it's a grape. When you take a grape off the tree, you lay the grape onto the ground. That's how most raisins are made. You take them off the tree, lay them on the ground, and it dries out, and it turns into a raisin. At that point, when the fruit splits and the juices will oozing out of it, now it's open. Now bugs, eggs get laid in the raisin, in the grape as it's turning into a raisin, and those bugs form later on. Okay, so if we're looking for an example of a bug that came in after the fruit was off the ground, that's what a raisin. That's the bugs that are in raisins, and so the Taz says, which is it came up again now, but it's an old child, it's not new. But those bugs are mutter. You're allowed to eat those bugs. They were born in the raisin, they never left the raisin, and you're allowed to eat them. Then there are other reasons why they should be mutter. We're going to keep on. We're going to, in a bunch of these things that we're going to pass. There are other reasons to say it might be mutter, but that was a very simple reason why those bugs are in those raisins are mutter. But one of the number of reasons is because they never crawled on the ground. The bugs that they never crawled on the ground are mutter.
So what's that one so trouble about? Because it's bugs and raisins.
Many people's gut reaction is that you wouldn't want to eat something with a bug in it. That doesn't mean that it's asur to eat it. And it took a little time while they worked on the science of it to make sure that really was, those bugs really came in after they left the tree, rather than had the bug been put in there from when it was on the tree, it would have been asur. It's because it got into the fruit after it left the tree, that's why it's mutter. Now, there's an exception. I told you that as a rule, fruits don't have bugs in them because fruits have no place for bugs to hide in them. Fruits tend to be solid and don't have any place to hide. And there's an exception to that. Well, there's a potential exception to that, and those are figs. Okay. Figs, if it's the wrong season. I tried to get a few, but you can't get it now. The wrong season to get fresh figs. If you ever see a fresh fig, it looks like I don't know how do I describe it. It comes like a point on the top. It's like a pointy top, and it gets wide on the bottom. It's like a bulb on the bottom. Okay? And that, if you went at the very bottom of that, not the pointy part, the other end of it, there's a big hole in the middle of it. Okay? It's not like most fruit. There's a big hole, and you could put something right into there. Okay? And of course, bugs can get into that hole. And actually, the hole is not there by mistake. It's not, a fig is not like other fruits. In fact, botanically, we call a fig a fruit because it's something that hangs on a tree. It's something that hangs on a tree and we eat it. So we call figs fruit. But botanically, figs are not fruits. A fig is actually a flower. Okay? And botanically, we say a fig is an inverted flower. Okay? Think of a fig as it would be inside out. Inside out, a fig is really, it has all the parts of a flower, but instead, usually in a flower, they stick out, and they're covered with something colorful. But in a fig, they're all facing onto the inside. Okay? And the point of flowers is you need to, trees have to get pollinated from one another, and the flowers there's different functions for the flowers, and that's where the pollen has to transfer from one tree to another tree. Well, if Hashem would have made a fig with the flower completely facing on the inside with no opening on the inside, it would be a waste. Well, what's the point? It's not going to get pollinated. Okay? That's what it's there for, is to get pollinated from the tree over it. So there's a hole on the bottom of it for it to become pollinated. In fact, there's a wasp that goes from tree to tree pollinating the figs.
So if it's a flower, why is it Shivas Aminim?
That's a good question. Why is it Shivas Aminim? Because even we again,
that's a tough question.
Botanically, we would call it a flower, but for a lay person calls that thing a fruit. A fruit is something that grows on a tree and you eat. Okay, and that's what figs are. You go in the winter, there's none of them on there. You come there in the summer, they're on there. They grow, you eat them, and we call that a fruit. It's something that you eat. It's not a fruit, and if you don't plant. If you plant a fig, you're not going to get another fig tree. If it doesn't have the seeds in it, I don't think. I should say. I don't think you get another. So we're not going to get into whether there actually are. It's actually a question in Metzias. It's actually a question in Metzias whether there are bugs in figs or not. And Kashrus are that there are not. But there's actually extremes in how people look at that. Whether there are or there are not bugs in figs. But the reason why fig is different than the other fruits is because the fig is not structured like anything like the fruit. Okay, so I told you that if the bug comes into a fruit, into anything that's off the ground, that bug is mutter. It never crawls on the ground, it's mutter. Okay? And there's a very strong question on that. A strong question. Any of you have been...
You're saying if the bug never crawled on the ground, or if the fruit
bug
never?
No, if the bug never crawled on the ground...
How would you know that?
Okay, so, that's a fair question. If you don't know whether the bug came in off the ground or on the ground, you have to assume that it came in on the ground.
Right.
You don't know. If it came in on the ground, it would be usher. You have to assume that it came on the ground. So, except like we had mentioned at the beginning that raisins, we know that the bugs come in off the ground. Okay, but I have another example of you, which any of you who follow the CRC's alerts should ask me this question. Okay, there's another example of something. Thank you. Something that the bugs come in for sure off the ground, and they never crawled on the ground. Okay, and that is bugs in barley or flour or any grains. Okay, those bugs that are in there are not from when the grain was on the ground. Any bugs that were on the ground get sifted out. There's no bugs from when they were on the ground. What happens is when you prepare flour or grains or anything like that, you get rid of whatever bugs you can. They get rid of everything that can be gotten rid of. There are a certain amount of eggs get left behind. Try as they might, there's a certain amount of eggs, an infinitesimal amount of eggs that get left behind. Over time, after months and months of sitting, especially if conditions are not good, those grow into bugs. Okay? Well, so that means in my bag of flour, when they put the flour into the bag, or they put the barley into the bag, and we've recently had an alert about bugs in barley. When they put the barley into the bag, there were no bugs in it. Now, sitting in storage, because it was bad conditions or something went wrong, and now 3 months later it's sitting in my house, there are bugs in my barley. Well, those bugs never crawled on the ground. They grew inside the bag. So now, if you saw those bugs, most people here would not want to eat them. I do have to tell you, they're rather disgusting. And most people would be very turned off by it. And the truth is, if you did it wrong, if you let those bugs crawl into your pot, it would be usher. But are the bugs really usher in the bag? Is there anything usher about them? They never crawled on the So I'm telling you the bug has to crawl in. What's wrong with these bugs? We know that those bugs don't come from the field. They only came when they came off the ground. Anybody want to try to give an answer? Except for Yankee. You know? Anybody have an answer?
I have a question.
Okay, you have a question?
So, it's considered usher if it crawled on the ground, meaning anything besides fruit.
It had to have crawled on something that's on the ground. Meaning, if it's the bag of barley is not attached to the ground.
Right.
It would have to crawl something that's attached to the ground.
You said if it would go on your pot when you put it in a pot.
Oh, okay. You're right. I'm sorry. I forgot this. I'm sorry. I forgot. No. It's good. It's a question. Really, the rule is not. You're right. It doesn't have to crawl on the ground. It has to leave its habitat to become usher. I should clarify. It needs to leave its habitat. So the habitat of this bug is the bag of flour or the bag of barley. If it were to leave that habitat where it was born, then it would become usher. Okay? It didn't have to technically go on the ground. You're right. It has to leave its habitat.
So let's say you have an apple that the bug was born in there and it didn't leave there.
You'd be allowed to eat
You're allowed to eat it.
Yes, you're allowed to eat
And
it.
same thing with lettuce.
Lettuce, if the bug came off the ground. Most bugs in vegetables come when it's on the ground. That's typical that it's when it's on the ground. While it's sitting growing in the ground, bugs crawl onto it and they grow there.
Even though
but if you had an apple
though it was
attached to the
attached.
ground.
when it was attached to the ground, it's usher. Even if it was born right there in the lettuce.
So same thing with the apple.
If it grew in the apple attached to the tree, right? If it
It'll
grew in
be
the apple, if it was born in the apple in the fruit store, then you'd be okay, right? Then you could eat it. But if it was born in the
Not
apple,
attached.
okay. So the
It
answer
was
is
born in the apple while the apple was attached to the tree, which is on the
that would be
ground.
usher.
It would be
That would be usher. Yes. But we're actually going to come to a case about that in a second. Hold that thought for a second. We'll get that in a second. So the answer to the question is, so I asked you, so why the bugs in flour and barley usher? Question, again, these are not new questions. The Beis Yosef asked that question. Okay, the Orthodox Shulchan asked that question. The Shach brings what the Beis Yosef says. He answers like this. He says, when there's a bag of flour that has a bug inside of it, the habitat of the bug is the flour that's in there. All that flour, all the barley that's in there. But the bag is not the habitat. So when if the bug crawls around in the flour, the bug is mutter still. If the bug crawls onto the inside of the bag, that the bug has now left the habitat. The habitat is just the flour, and when it gets onto the bag,
it might have touched the bag.
so it might have gotten onto the bag, and that's why it's usher. And it's actually a shiloh. We're not going to talk about that tonight. It's a shiloh. No, it's a big shiloh. We're going to talk about it. Well, why should I be Kosher? Why do I keep maybe it went onto the bag? It's a very good question. We're not talking about that. No, but in other cases like that, there's actually a case like he had. You have a fruit with a hole sticking out of it, and it sure looks like the bug trying to get out of there. It's mutter. Okay, it's a question. We're not going to talk about that tonight.
Because we speak a little about Safini Surah.
That's part of the answer. We're not going to talk about it. This question as to why we think he didn't crawl out. Okay, but here we have. So we have this bug, and the Beis Yosef says we're choishish that it crawled onto the bag. Why is not for us to talk about it? We're choishish that it crawled onto the bag. Okay, so the question is like this: we're choishish that it crawled onto the bag, and the bag is considered out of the habitat. There's another din. I don't think we have anybody here from New York. Okay, in New York, years ago you're from New York? Okay, they have a shiloh. People live in New York City. Have a New York City. Okay, no, I should just New York City. In New York City, they have a shiloh about bugs in their water. Bugs growing in their water. Okay, and in bugs in water are also only usher. Bugs in water are also only usher if they left their habitat. If they grew in a cup and they never left it, they're mutter. But there the din is that the inside of the cup, the inside of the container, is considered their habitat. So we say, there if the bug crawled onto the side of the wall, it's mutter. Okay, if you have a bucket of water.
So the beer, right? The beer, that's where it's
Some question. Yes, some more question. Vinegar.
The Rashi.
If you have a bucket of water and bugs grow inside of it.
Anything liquid, you need something to contain it. Or else
The container.
It wouldn't be any volume.
Okay, therefore.
It'd be
Right, so the bugs are ushered a mutter even though they crawled onto the walls. And for the bag of flour or barley, if they crawl onto the inside of the walls, they're ushered.
Yeah, but if there's a bag of water, it would still be good.
What do you mean?
Bag of water, it'd be mutter.
If it crawled onto the bag?
Yeah.
No, they would
Bag of water. It would have to be.
It would be mutter. Yes, it would be mutter.
So you're asking what the difference is?
So what's the difference? So why is it that the water? Right. So why is it that the water, the bag, when it crawled into the side of the water, into the barrel or the bag of water, it's mutter still, and it crawls into the bag or the container of flour or barley, and it's also
The barley itself is a self-contained
unit.
It creates matter. It creates
Matter.
volume.
Right. You can if you put
And
it on the
therefore?
counter, it'll just and therefore it is its habitat.
Oh, so
However,
very good,
without
very good. So the Chazon Ish says, very good. That's what the Chazon.
Listen to the tapes on our web.
It could be. So that's what the Chazon Ish says. The Chazon Ish says the nafkamina is like this: fruits. He says there's three classes. He says there are three classes. There are three classes of items. Fruits. If I had a bunch of oranges sitting on the table, they're completely independent of a container. I mean, we could put them into a bowl, but a bunch of fruits sitting on the table are completely, they don't need anything to hold them together. And the opposite extreme is water, that the water, if there wasn't some kind of a container, they'd be completely, they would never hold themselves together. And in between are small grains and rice, and salt is one of the other cases where Ramah says, so in between cases where they sort of would stay together, but they wouldn't exactly hold the way you would expect them to. Okay? So the Chazon Ish says, in fruits, for sure the container is nothing, it's not the habitat. In water, for sure the container is the habitat, it's what keeps it together. And in small things like grains and salt, those cases are machlokes, and we're machmir in those cases, that the container is not considered part of the habitat. Okay? And therefore, if the bugs crawled onto the edges, it's also. And in fact, for those of you who are checking your barley, there are bugs in the middle of the barley. Okay, but after you empty all the barley out of the bag, there tend to be bugs on the bag also.
On the bottom.
Okay? They seem to attach themselves to the bag. They like the crumbs. Okay, that's what they're. Okay, that's the scientist tells us that's what they grow on. They live on the particles of grain rather than the whole grains themselves. So it's a crumb, that's what they're after.
That's why when you see barley, bags of barley that has a lot of cellulose on the bottom.
Yes, when you see a lot of crumbs, it should make you more nervous. When your bag has a lot of crumbs on the bottom of it, that should make you overall more nervous. Okay. Okay, now we move to a different shiloh. Now we're out of our Shiva
How large are those bugs? Are they easily found?
Oh yeah. Those are the ones that are nice and big.
Yeah, we haven't had barley.
I haven't found
no?
anything.
No,
Right.
barley
You're
in a
deprived.
while.
You are deprived. Hope you have a good children.
Beans. Oh, any beans?
I
My wife.
appreciate your sympathy.
She
We
checks.
grow our own lettuce.
Fully true.
So the whole thing is,
Not easy.
you know,
Right. Okay. So you know what it's like.
piece of cake. No, do it.
Okay. So now move to a little bit of a variation of these shiloh, which is, what would you say? What would you say is the status if you find a bug in a mushroom? Okay.
In a mushroom.
In a mushroom.
You have to know.
In a mushroom.
You have to know if the vegetable or fruit typically has the bug inside, or if it comes from outside in.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning that, like the fig or the apple, you have to know if the worm started inside the apple, it was an egg, or if it came from outside.
Okay. So my question is, the mushrooms. I'm not thinking that the bugs came in from after they were taken off the ground. I'm talking about as they were there while it was attached. Okay, now, but my point of my question, what I'm getting to is, mushrooms have a special status different than other fruits. Okay? Most things that grow, we say they're grown in the ground. If I grow tomatoes, those tomatoes are grown in the ground. Okay? Mushrooms are not considered to have grown in the ground. We know we make a bracha shahak on them. We say they don't grow from the ground in the same way that other fruits do. So
No, they're not. They're not from the...
says that
Very good.
taken nether
Very
from Dulei Kaka.
it's exactly what Rambam says. There are some. Okay, I'll tell you what he said. Some people say that since the bracha on some people say that since the bracha on mushrooms is shahako, we say they don't grow from the ground, they grow from the air. We say, are there fungi that they grow from the air? They therefore they're not considered to be attached to the ground. And any bugs that are in there are bugs that came in not attached to the ground. By their nature, they came not attached to the ground because mushrooms are not attached to the ground. Okay, but the thing is not like that. The Ramah says that they have, in certain halachas, they have a status of growing in the ground. Okay, well, he mentioned one of them. Well, exactly what the details are is not so important to us. There are cases, for certain things, they are considered to be attached to the ground, and therefore, for bugs, they're considered to be attached to the ground also. Okay, but there's enough to mean. I'm not going to give you all the details of it, but there's a question what the Ramah means when he says that. Okay? And the question has to do with what would be the din if you grew your mushrooms, not mushrooms growing on the side of the road, literally on the ground. What happens if you grew your mushrooms in a container that's not attached to the ground? You grew them in
In a knuckle.
in a flower pot. Okay, you grew them in a container that's not attached to the. It has soil inside it, but it's not attached to the ground.
Well, why dafka mushrooms?
Why dafka mushrooms? The reason why the shaila has to do with mushrooms is because that's how mushrooms are grown. Okay, there's actually a guy down the road. If you want to go,
It would be the same shaila by an orange.
it would be like any fruit, but the shaila is brought by mushrooms. The place can talk about it for mushrooms because it's a very lemaisa for mushrooms. Not so many people grow tomatoes in the Atzashay Nugget. Well, nowadays people do, but now people didn't used to do that, grow tomatoes in a flower pot. But mushrooms is a guy down the
There
road.
is a shadow of someone growing tomatoes in a flower pot.
Yes, it's a question whether that's considered attached to the ground or not attached to the ground.
Not by the brother.
Different for that one is not necessarily.
That's a part of the question. Yes, that's part of the question. I'm talking about the bugs of it.
Whatever question.
I'm talking about the bugs of it. Are those bugs considered a bug that came onto it? Did it come attached to the ground or not attached to the ground? If they grew in a flower pot, then maybe it's not considered grew in the ground.
About hydroponic, the same thing.
Yes, it's so much. We're gonna come back around to that if we can. If we get to it, we'll get
How
to
they
it.
grow all the bugs fruit in Israel.
So there's a question whether when there are muscles that consider attached to the ground, does that apply even if it grew in a in a flower pot? It grew something that was off the ground. Okay, that's not a theoretical shaila. Mushrooms very much grow there. I was saying to you on 50, when you come on your way home, you'll see there's a guy growing mushrooms. There's a mushroom farm. Okay, I haven't been inside. It says come in for free tours. Come in for tours. Mushrooms grow in these dark. No, that was on the way here. On the way home, you'll see on the way home.
My wife saw it. My nose were almost here because of the mushroom farm.
Yes, the mushrooms grow in. They grow in dark, windowless warehouses. Okay, they grow on. I don't know if you're going to want to eat afterwards, but on trays, on beds of manure. Okay, in dark, windowless warehouses. That's how they grow. Okay, and they grow up to Shin Makuf. Okay, so you could potentially think. I'm heading to good news, but it's going to be bad news. You would think, therefore, that bugs that are grown, that come in mushrooms, there would be reason to think that they should be mutter. They should be mutter because they came when it was off the ground. If they came when it's off the ground, I said to you, if the bug comes in when it's off the ground, and these flower pots are considered off the ground, there would be basis to say that these are off the ground, they should be mutter. Let there be bugs in the mushroom, I don't care. I mean, you might be disgusted by it, but din-wise, the din would be that you'd be allowed to eat them, because those bugs would be considered off the ground. They came in off the ground because the thing was never attached to the ground. It grew in a bed that's not attached to the ground. Okay?
But are you saying that you're allowed to eat it, meaning if you see it, you're allowed to eat it, or are you saying that if you ate it,
No,
you're okay?
there would be basis to say that you would be allowed to eat it. Again, not
Or
all
is it acid
not
with
all
the
bugs are also. Let me take it back. I don't want to say that if it's disgusting to you.
No, I'm just saying
If something is disgusting to you, you can't eat it. That's a separate thing. But as far as the halachas of eating bugs, only certain bugs are also. If the bug never fell in the ground,
Let's say it's so small. Anyway, would you have to wash such a fruit? You have to, and have it cleaning the bugs. How far do you have to go with it?
what do you want to say? Okay, well, he wants to tell you that there's what he mentioned beforehand about bugs in fish. There are many bugs in fish that are mutter. Okay, as most bugs actually in fish are mutter. So and many fish that you eat have worms in them. So I don't know if you eat fish, but
I eat a lot of fish. I'm not eating anything now.
You're from New York.
Those
The
Gemara says a story. The Gemara says the Gemara says a story that he said to his mother. And he said, "Do me a favor. Don't tell me when you saw the worms in them, because if I know about them, to me it'll be disgusting. I don't want to eat it then. So you just keep on cooking. Don't tell me what you saw, and I'll be allowed to eat it." Okay, anyhow, so even though it might have sounded like good news for those who want to eat mushrooms, in truth is that it's not good news. And the answer is like this: there are two ways. There's two ways that you can go out there and that you can grow mushrooms. Mushrooms are grown commercially. There are.
They wanted to make it at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
10 o'clock.
Are we going to do that in the other room?
There's girls in there.
So let's sit in the corner. So there's two ways. There are some, we call them farms. I don't know what you call them. Mushroom growing facilities. I don't know what you call them. They're not exactly farms. Who grow mushrooms. In exactly as I described to you until now, they're places that are in containers that are off the ground. They never off the ground, and there would be reasoning those are mutter. The thing is that those places are who do it like that, which is where most of our mushrooms come from, are very sophisticated, very modern, and very free of bugs. Because part of what they do is they want to grow a very specific strains of what they're trying to grow. So they sterilize their manures before they grow it. They make sure there's nothing else growing into them, and they're very careful that nothing else should be in there. Their mushrooms come out without bugs in them. The people who make mushrooms who have bugs is not your typical these kind of more sophisticated countries, but places that are more backwards, places that are not as sophisticated, and they tend to do it right on the ground. They have their beds, but those beds are sitting on the ground in ways that don't qualify for the thing that I just told you. Okay, we have two more types to do, unless someone's running off tomorrow. Two more parts of this question. I told you that if the bug was ever on the ground, that bug was usher, even if it never moved. I told you if a bug was born off the ground and it stayed in its habitat, then it's mutter. What happens if you have a bug that grew on the ground, but not on the ground and not on the tree, but on a fruit? This is the case you two were talking about. On the fruit, while the fruit was attached to the ground. It grew on the fruit, and it never moved from in the fruit. It never moved. We know that the fruit never moved. Okay, what's an example of that? Okay. We have a really great modern example of it. And we're only going to talk about half the child that has to do with this bug right now. Okay, there's a whole other part of the child that we're not going to talk about. Okay, and it's something called it's called citrus scale. Okay, it's something we don't see very much of in the United States because it doesn't look very pretty. So, as a rule, farmers spray their citrus fields to not have it. Okay, but citrus scale is a tiny bug that grows on the outside, on the peels of citrus fruits. Okay, that's why it's called citrus scale. Okay, this is not a great example of it. These are oranges that have some of it on it. Okay, most oranges you see are much cleaner. You most commonly see it in America on juice oranges, because juice oranges are, by their nature, for juice. They're not meant for selling for eating. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see it from here. There's so many dots on this thing. Look at a dot like this. Okay. What there is, you see this one over here? I don't have my tweezers here to pull it.
He's killed it.
See this dot over here? No, it's long dead already. Don't worry. We pulled this one off here. This one. Okay. What it is here's some of them. There are bugs. Okay, we'll look at them afterwards. You guys see? Okay. Yeah, sure and tell. There are bugs. What they do is like this. There's they don't move. No, that's why I'm giving you as an example so that doesn't move, which is like this. There's a tiny, what you're seeing on the top on these fruit, what I'm showing you is a coating that's on top of a bug. Okay, it's a coating that the bug secretes around itself while it's sitting on top of that piece of fruit. The bug itself is sitting there and never moves. Okay, the bug sticks a proboscis, I think the word is. Okay, it sticks something long and pokey into the fruit, and it never moves off the fruit. It sits there perfectly still in the fruit. Okay, what happens is that after it sits there and it gets all its nourishment from the fruit. Once it moves in there, it sheds its legs. Okay, because it has no need to move any place. Okay, and the biggest citrus scale is like the size of one of these bullets over here. Okay, you see the bullets over here? Okay, it's about 2 millimeters. You see the bullet like this? That's the size of the mature scale. It might be bigger on the fruit because it's covering differently, but this is that size. Under there, it's sitting there. Under there, it gives birth to 10 to 15 babies at a time. Okay, who fit all underneath that same little spot. Okay? Each one of the babies is approximately 1/4 of a millimeter across. Okay? 1/4 of a millimeter, that's what the money's here for. Okay? The difference in thickness between coins, okay? The size of an American was a penny, of thickness is penny, which are dime, penny, nickel, quarter. Okay? And the difference between each one of them is about 1/4 of a millimeter. difference in thickness. Okay, so you can take 2 coins and put them next to each other and see if you can see the difference between the thickness of one and the next. Okay, if you put a dime and a penny next to each other, could you think about how little the difference is in thickness between them? It's a tiny amount. Okay, there's a tiny amount of difference in thickness. That's how big the baby is. Okay, the baby crawls out from under the mother's shell, goes to someplace else where he moves in, where he wants to be. He attaches himself to that spot, and now he never moves. Sheds his legs, and he's gone. He's there for good. Right? He stays. He's there for life.
He's moving from one part to the thing, but he's still out.
So the question is like this: if there's a practical question, is it possible that anyone can see when that bug moved from here to there? The mother gave birth. The mother, this is mommy over here. Okay, mommy over here gave birth to 10 little guys like that. But each one of them is as tiny as anything. They all spread around, park themselves someplace, and then they never move. Okay, so the question is, one question, if they're big enough to be seen at that point. If they're big enough to be seen, then I can't tell you that the bug never moved. The bug did move. When he was born, he moved from here to there, and he parked himself over there, and then he stays still. So some people say, yes, you can see it. Yes, it's visible. Tiny as can be, it's visible. But people claim that they have seen it and they can see it moving. What? There's a question whether he saw it or not. He says. Can you see a quarter of a millimeter? Yes. It's size even I can see, right?
Of course, that doesn't mean it's...
That he said.
Theoretically, you can see it.
He says his words are "Yecholim lahargish ktsas b'richishasim." I'm not sure what that means. He says, you could sort of see when they move. Okay, I'm not sure how to translate that.
He's there for half an hour.
That's what the story says. That's not what it says in the Sefer. The story says "Yecholim lahargish ktsas b'richishasim." I'm not sure exactly how to. Okay, so it's a question. If he did or didn't see what that is. If you could see, if that's considered that you saw it, then we don't have what to talk about. Then these bugs really did move. If we say that those bugs are not visible, as others claim, that they're not visible to move, then this bug is an example of this shaila, of what happens if you have something that grew on the fruit, but it never moved. Okay, now, I have to just say something. What's the din of that shaila? What's the din if that even is a shaila? The Shulchan Aruch says it's mutter. Shulchan Aruch says it's mutter. The Ramah says that it's also. The Ramah says that case is also. Even if it grew on the fruit and it never moved off the fruit, if it grew on the tree, for sure it would be us. If it grew on the fruit, the Ramah says it's us in that case. So, on this part of the shaila, even if it's true that the fruit that it never moved, even if you couldn't have seen it and it never moved, from this part of the shaila, the bug would be us because the Ramah says that it's us. Okay, there's a second part of the shaila, we're not talking about. Okay, one last thing, not so much related to what we're doing, but it's interesting enough that okay, this is harder to do in the winter than in the summer. Okay, there's a this is so yeah. Okay, what? Soup, yeah. And that is another example of a bug that grows on the fruit. This is a very unusual bug. This is a very unusual bug in that this is a bug that you can't remove citrus scale either by washing them off. But this is an unusual bug that can't be removed, okay? And that is because these are called, you may have heard this word, called leaf miners. Okay? But that means like this. There's a bug, another unusual bug, which is like this. The mother finds when she's ready to lay her eggs, instead of laying her eggs any place that she chooses to, she sorry, give him a second. The mother, instead of just laying her eggs, she finds, in our case, we'll talk about a celery. That's what we're talking about. There's other more exciting cases than that. Let's talk about a celery. She pokes a hole into the celery, lays her eggs inside the celery, and the baby crawls horizontally through the celery as it grows and grows and grows. When it's grown to a big enough size, it then pokes a hole at the other end and flies away. Okay? It flies away to go lay its eggs at the next place. Okay? So the bug stays is inside the celery itself. In celery, it's not so unusual. You're not so surprised by that. But it does the same thing in leaves also. Okay, in a leaf, think about how thin a leaf is. It lays a bug, its egg in there, and then it crawls through the leaf without ripping the leaf. Okay, and you see the trails running through the leaf where the bug ate away. The baby is eating away through the inside leaf, keeping a layer on top and bottom as protection. Okay, that's what's keeping it safe inside. Okay, it's hard to get them in the winter. They're harder to find in the winter. You can only see that.
You're going to find it. You're going to just find the trail.
You're going to find the trail. Okay, so you'll see is you could see the trails over here. I'll pass it around. You could see the trails passing around in this bug. So it happens to be. They're most common of all things if it's in celery. But they also come in other leafy vegetables also. It's
Why is that why they say to not use the first few leaves of the celery?
So now. No.
Celery.
No.
Don't eat the first few leaves.
You mean the leaves or the...
No, we're not talking about in the stalks.
The first few stalks of leaves?
Yeah. So now things
Send it to me.
like this.
Right, so
The things like this. We have to think about a few things, then we'll finish up with this.
So they're not in there yet anymore, you say?
So now, we're gonna come back to why am I telling you about celery here. Okay, but let me just say a few things about the leaf martin. First of all is they're not very common. First of all, they're not. Okay, the first thing is that they're not very common. They're not common. But secondly is it's not even clear that a person needs to be concerned about them, and that's because, as Rabbi Eisenach was hinting at, there's no issue to eat the trail of a leaf miner. The issue is to eat the bugs in there, and there are bugs in there. I've seen them pulled out whole, coming out of everything. But the whole life cycle of this bug, the whole life cycle is 3 to 4 weeks. The whole life cycle. If it's in there, yeah, but it's only the only issue is if the bug is in there. If the bug already pulled out, there's no issue to eat it. Right? If it just left the trail on, that would be okay. So the whole life cycle is 3-4 weeks from the time it lays the eggs till it makes its way through, crawls out, and gets big enough to lay eggs again. So, and it only lays it when it's attached to the ground. So I have to buy the celery at just the right time when the bug is in there and the bug hasn't come out yet. Okay. So, but you see, listen.
Can we figure out that by the time it gets...
It's questionable. There are times they're actually in there. I've seen them in there. I've seen people cut open, out come the live bug. But that's a question. But really, I'm coming around to a point. Well, this bug that's in here is usher because it was attached to the ground. When the bug came in, it was attached to the ground, and it stayed in its habitat. But I told you, if it was born attached to the ground, that bug was usher. Okay, but what would it be if I grew the celery or the leafy lettuces not on the ground, but I grew it hydroponically? I grew it in the place that was off the ground. In that case, the bug definitely didn't leave its habitat. If it left its habitat, it wouldn't be here anymore. The only shaila is it's still inside of here. Well, if the shaila is that it's still inside of here, it grew in a place that's not attached to the ground altogether. It grew in something that's off the ground. That, in those cases, that bug would be okay. I wouldn't have to worry about leaf going from those items because in the place where it grew off the ground. It grew as a we'll call Asher Shem Knuckle. It grew in the thing that was off the ground, and for this kind of case, that would be good.